And now, a very special presentation on One Leg Up with Alex Garrett.
I've been blessed with the gift of inspired poetry most of my life. And I'm going to share a poem that I've shared in print before, but this will be the first time that I've recited it for you. It's a poem of comfort for those who have lost loved ones, and the understanding, my personal understanding, is that we are soul family and will be reunited someday. The poem is called Circles and Rings. The path of great beauty in so many things, from atoms to galaxies, circles and rings. Natural wisdom that dwells there within, from naught to 360, that magical spin. We circle each other in gravity's dance, as Gaia circles Sol, the solar romance, as Luna circles us in life-giving motion, drawing the tides and inner emotion. And the age of the oak is found in its rings, as in woman and man and all living things. And when the rings stop and life comes to an end, we'll all circle back and dance once again.
That voice is someone you hear that I am fortunate enough to not only have introduced my podcast, but call my dad, Victor Fuhrman, Dr. Victor Fuhrman. Thanks for joining my podcast, One Leg Up, today.
Alex, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for asking me to join you and for all of the love and support you've given me.
Well, you've turned that poem, Circles and Rings, into a book published by Goddess Communications, and of course, that is by my mom, but we'll get into the book itself. So talk about the poem, why you wrote it, and then how it's turned into a book now.
For me, poetry has always been inspired. I see visions or hear things that give me inspiration. And as I share in the book, my mother passed away in January of 2020. And shortly after she passed, I started seeing these visions of circles and rings. And they kept appearing to me. And I realized they were giving me a message, an inspired message, about the fact that we may leave this life, but ultimately we also will return. And for those that we love, maybe we leave them in one lifetime, but I truly believe and have come to find that we are reunited with them in another lifetime. And that was the inspiration for the poem and the inspiration for the book, which is a collection of 50 of my poems, some of which I wrote when I was 13, and some that I've written in the last 4 or 5 years.
And talk about that journey of poetry, because you've been involved with that for many years. As you said, 13 years old, or maybe even younger.
Yeah, younger, but the first real cogent poem was when I was 13. But I come from, interestingly enough, a family, the Fuhrman side of my family, who are poets. My dad, Abraham Fuhrman, was a poet. He used to rhyme a lot. And what I didn't find out until after my mother passed away was that she had a collection of his poems, love poems, that he had sent to her both before and after they were married. And my aunt Ada and my aunt Lillian, my uncle Willie, all of the Fuhrmans were poets in their own right. And when I was a child, my aunt Ada used to have me sit with her at the piano, and she would play songs on the piano, and I would make up lyrics that rhymed when they were when she was doing the piano playing. And my aunt Lillian was a stockbroker, and she had taken me to her office in the 1960s, where they did the stock company, the stock brokerage. And I learned the names of some of the companies, and I learned some of the terms that they used, and I actually turned that into a little lyric for a song, and she played the piano, and I sang the song. It was called The Stock Market Syndrome, and that was from the 1960s. So I believe that rhyming and poetry in that sense is something that's genetic, and so consequently I inherited it from the Fuhrman side of my family.
You know, you've lived through the 60s. I feel like that was a big part of the 60s. And did you find poetry sort of a fabric of your life even during that time as well?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, when I was 13, the first poem came through me. I thought I was the reincarnation at one point of Edgar Allan Poe. And I wrote a poem called Injustice, and I'm not going to share it now, but my inspiration was the idea of someone being executed uh, by a king who found him to be disloyal. And so consequently, it inspired that poem called Injustice. And it kind of mirrors for me the type of thing that Edgar Allan Poe would have written. And so that's why I felt that deep connection with Edgar Allan Poe.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned that your family and your father and your family had done poetry. Would you say creativity is hereditary then?
Yeah, specifically the gift of rhyme and poetry, I think, is something that can be passed down genetically, and I am grateful for that genetic gift. I remember as a kid, my father and my aunts and uncles sitting around a table after a holiday dinner, and the children were not supposed to be present, but I would sneak back to listen to what they were sharing, and they would share limericks. And for those who are aware of limericks, you know that most of limericks are rather vulgar, use vulgar language. But in the case of my family, I would listen and I would love the rhyming and I would giggle when I would hear it. The great publisher, Bennett Cerf, wrote a limerick about limericks. He was a fan of limericks. And he said, limericks cast laughs gastronomical in a space that is so economical. But the good ones I've seen so seldom are clean, and the clean ones so seldom are comical. So for people who are not familiar with limericks, that's a limerick, the way the rhyming and the stands go. So
Dad, I know you've had quite a journey on this earth. Has poetry been a healing tool for you as well?
absolutely. I found that any time that I've had sorrow in my life or a loss of my life, that expressing that in poetry, not only for me, but to help others who would eventually see those poems. I used to share my poems on Facebook, and I would share my poems in other places and websites and literary magazines. And so, consequently, those poems create an energy of healing, um, give people hope at a time of loss, at a time of pain, at a time of suffering, and recognize the fact that when we all have loss or all go through some type of tragedy, that with compassion and empathy, we can help each other and share that energy with each other.
Now, I know that you've adapted some of Rabbi Gelman's use of poetry. Talk about, are there any that define names in the book? I have to ask that.
No, not really. And those are not really poems. Rabbi Joseph Gelberman, who was the founder of the new seminary that I attended, was graduated and ordained by, including, and your mother was also, that's how we met. He used to say that in the Kabbalistic tradition, you could take a name and use the letter that began with all the letters from name and find a deeper meaning for the people who carried that name. So, for example, if we use the name Alex and said, what's in the name Alex? What's hidden in the name Alex? I'm doing this impromptu, by the way. I didn't have this prepared. So the A stands for abilities. And Alex, who was born with the challenge of having one leg, but knows that he has one leg up on everything in this world, is a gentleman who expresses all of his life and his thrill for life and his activity and everything with these abilities that he has within him to go out and explore and find out all of the wonderful things. The L stands for laughter. Alex loves to laugh, and as a someone who shares jokes from time to time, I'm grateful that I have Alex as an audience because he laughs at all of my dumb jokes, the dad jokes that I tell. The E stands for excellence. Alex puts together work that is excellent, be it his personal work on these podcasts and other things that he shares publicly, to the work that he does within broadcasting. Excellence is the word that defines the work that Alex brings to the world. And the X stands for extreme, with a wrong spelling, obviously, the poetic spelling of extreme. And whether it comes to sports or any of the things that Alex finds thrills with and finds enjoyment from and finds stimulating in his life, he takes them all to the extreme. Just for those who don't know, Alex has probably met more famous people, more famous athletes and broadcasters and people in political life, and they all have embraced him for his excellence, for his laughter, and for his abilities.
And may I say, Dad, that you took me in as one of your own basically when I was 6 years old. I know that 25 years ago you and Mom made it official, but when I was 6, I went over to see you at the studio, at the audio booth at the temple, and then we hit it off right there.
Absolutely. Your spirit, your energy, for people who have never physically met you, you can get it sometimes from photographs. But from those who have never met you, Alex, from the time I met him when he was 6 years old, had this smile, this smile that engaged you and just drew you in to find out more about who this young man was. And this spirit, this outpouring of spirit of joy and exuberance in everything that he did. And who could not fall in love with a person who does what Alex does?
Well, thank you, Dad, for that. Now, people have fallen in love with what you've done through these poems on Facebook. And when you get people's reactions on there, when you post these poems now in a book, Circles and Ring, what does that mean to you when people are reacting? Yes, they love what you're writing.
It means that the mission that I've taken on since I became an ordained interfaith minister, but also before that, is a mission of healing and a mission of empathy and a mission of compassion. So consequently, when someone writes to me and says, your poem meant so much to me, it helped me get through a difficult time, or your poem inspired me to go out and do something different in my life, I know that I'm fulfilling my mission. I don't go out looking for gratitude or compliments or any of that. But when I get those feedback messages, I know that everything that I put out in this world is meant for that higher reason, that purpose of healing and empathy and compassion and love.
I feel like it's a symmetrical, synchronistic is your word, that you and Mom basically met 25 years ago. She's a writer, you're a writer. I feel like there's a synchronicity there, isn't there?
Absolutely. And it's interesting that a lot of writers, if you look at some of the famous writers who were couples, they enjoyed both writing and expressing themselves with written word. And more than a synchronicity, I think that your mother and I are soulmates. There's no question about it. And you are a soulmate child. I don't know if you want me to share this, but I'll share this. In my first marriage, I lost a child prematurely born, lasted for 2 weeks. And when your mother and I got together, she showed me a picture of you as an infant. And I recognized the same face as the son that I lost in my first marriage. And I knew that you were my son coming back to me. That's a synchronicity. That's a soulmate. And your mom and I are soulmates. We're soulmate family.
I 100% believe that. And by the way, I've grown up in this household for now 25 years, and you both have had a lot of writings along the walls of our household, I feel like, right?
Absolutely. Your mom's stuff and some of my stuff and the photographs that represent in a photo form the poetry of the joy and the happiness that we've shared together as a family.
Now, if you can't tell, my dad, Vic Fuhrman, has a radio voice. So talk about your radio experience and even these radio shows that you've been doing with Om Times that have led to this formation of the book. Or have they had a role in it?
Indirectly, because I've shared some of the poems on some of the shows. You're talking about my podcasts. I do 2 podcasts for Om Times Magazine. They have Om Times Radio. And one podcast is called Destination Unlimited, which started in 2016 when I was co-officiating a wedding in New Jersey with your mother, and the publisher and the editor of Om Times and the Buck family, Chris and Liani Buck, were there. And we met them there. And at the time, they had heard my voice and said, we love your voice. Would you like to join us and do a podcast? And I said, absolutely. It was the right time to do it. And so consequently, Destination Unlimited was the first podcast that I started, which is the crossroads of science and spirituality. And then with the advent of COVID in 2020, 2021, I recognized the need for another podcast to address the issues that people were facing at that time. So that's how Vox Novus, the new voice, was born. So I've been doing those 2 podcasts for my dear, dear friends, Chris and Leonie Buck of Ohm Times. And then the previous broadcasting, when I was in Brooklyn College, I was on Brooklyn College Radio in 1970, 1971. And then I was in the Air Force for 6 years, 1973 to 1979. And I actually wound up in Armed Forces Radio in Korea in an organization called the American Forces Korea Network, where I did both radio and television news for the 2 years that I was in Korea. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. When I got out of the service, I actually tried to get into broadcasting. And at the time, the market, the wages they were offering were really low to start. And I realized I needed to have something a little more lucrative. And I placed an ad in the New York Times, the Sunday edition, saying, "Let my communication skills enhance your business." A gentleman saw that on a Monday, called me on a Tuesday and interviewed me, hired me on a Wednesday, and that started a 44-year career in the welding supply and industrial welding technology industry, which I just retired from at the end of March.
Yes, you did, and you've had a illustrious career there. Now, I have to say this for folks who wonder how I got to Queens College, it's because I followed my dad Vic's advice. I mean, you were there 15 years ago that said, "Why don't you just go to Queens and see what happens?" So I became a fellow CUNY alum because of your advice. How about that?
Absolutely. And I'm so grateful because within proximity to our home was a short bus ride away, and it gave you the ability to stay within the confines of the area that you'd be able to study and come home and do all the work that you want to do and do all the activity that you wanted to do also.
We've had a very bright household for the last 20 plus years, and there's been some tragedy amidst, losing Dee Dee, losing my pops. But how have you been able to keep us all light, if you will, during all these times of sadness and grief, actually?
You know something? One of the things that I learned, I lost my dad when I was 15. And one of the things that I learned from that experience was that grief and mourning is something that is natural. It's something that we all process. But when you sit with someone who's grieving and listen without trying to say anything, just allow them to share what they're going through, give them what I call compassionate and empathetic listening, it provides a space for them to process the grief. And in the doing the act of listening, he helps them to heal. And though the grief will be there, it'll be lessened and lessened and lessened through this act of love and compassion and empathy, what I call the gift of true listening.
When people and by the way, we're talking about reading today as well as listening. When people buy this book, what can they expect? I mean, they've seen your poems, but I feel like it's got to be an expanded thought process from one Victor Fuhrman, right? It's not just your poems; it's a lot of different writings and thoughts in this book, right?
Each of the poems has an introduction as to what inspired the poem. And the poems, some of them are funny. Some of them are aimed toward children. Some of them are aimed toward healing. Some of them are based on spirituality. And some of them are based on nature. There's various different topics that I cover, a full spectrum of topics that I cover. But each one has an introduction as to what inspired that poem. And it gives the reader an insight into the message that came through when the poem was inspired.
Do I understand that you had poems also published in newspapers when you were younger as well?
When I was in junior high school, I had some of my poetry published there. The poem about injustice was published in junior high school. When I don't know about high school, I don't remember. And I think in Brooklyn College, a couple of my poems, my early poems, were published. Yeah.
Do you, looking back and reading this as it's been published, A, how does that feel? And B, are you even taken aback that you had this emotional, spiritual journey these over, however many years?
I love to see the format. I'm grateful to your mother, who's my publisher. It's wonderful to have a publisher that you're also married to, and help me assemble it and do that because she had all those skills. I didn't have any of those skills. With reference to reflecting upon what's in there, I've come to a point in my life, especially the last few years, where I've come to recognize that everything, the rabbi who founded the seminary that your mother and I both attended, the new seminary, one of the first interfaith seminaries in the world, used to say, use an expression that said, everything is unfolding in divine order. We may not see it, we may not recognize it, we may even not like or detest things that are happening. But if you step back and use what he called spiritual eyes to look at what has happened, you recognize that there was a purpose for everything that took place. And in finding that purpose, you have this understanding and sense of peace. And I've come to a point in my life where I am so peaceful, literally peaceful about everything. Whatever challenge comes, there'll be a resolution to. Whatever problem comes, there'll be a solution for. And whatever sadness comes, there will be a healing from that sadness. So that's the way I look at life right now.
Well, I have to say this, Dad. I feel like every decision you made, whether it be for me, our family, your own life, you've had this intrinsically spiritual guidance through every decision. Am I right on that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
And that
I
doesn't
have,
come. That comes naturally, right? That doesn't come out of thin air.
I think that every one of us, every human being, every sentient human being has the capability of receiving spiritual, divine, depending upon your faith and religion, guidance. And that this guidance is there. We just have to listen to it. I call it the inner voice. Some people who are practitioners of psychic practices call it clairaudience, clear hearing. And the inner voice is sometimes described as the soft, quiet voice within. The voice that shouts at you, the internal voice that says, you got to do this or take this action or whatever it might be, that's the voice of ego. But the voice of spiritual guidance is that soft, clear voice. Please do this. This is something that's important for you to do. In that soft, gentle tone, loving tone. And every time I've listened to one of those voices and followed that, the results have been exactly what were meant to be in a positive way. So, to anyone listening to our conversation right now, if you hear that message, that inner voice, I'll give you a quick example. You and I and your mother were on a local highway several years ago. We were in the extreme left lane, and we were traveling at the speed limit, which on that highway is 45 or 50 miles an hour. And the voice came and said, you must leave this lane now. And I always listen to the voice. You'll remember this. And I got out of that lane and went into the middle lane. And within 5 seconds, there was a multiple car accident in the lane that we had left. And had we stayed there, we would have been in the middle of that multiple car accident. I listened to that voice. It wasn't shouting at me. It says, you must leave this lane now, in a very soft, reassuring voice. You remember that?
I of course do. And as we're talking about this, I think of, is it instinct? I feel like instinct is God's instinct for you. I mean, do you hear sort of that when you talk about spiritual voices, is the voice of God talking to you as well? I have to ask, or what are you hearing?
My source is that it's an angelic voice. When I say spiritual guide, it can be angels. It can be those who have passed before us, family and loved ones who have passed before us and have come to give us messages. But I believe it's all divinely inspired.
And we know New Jersey is not the easiest place to travel, so that's where that took place. There is a distinction then between instinct and the spiritual voice, isn't there?
I think so, yeah. When I talk about the spiritual voice, we're talking about something that comes through the divine, through God, through purpose of God. When we talk about instincts, that's something that's built into us. For example, we have an instinct to run away from danger. It's what they call the fight or flight instinct. So if you're presented with something, it gets the adrenaline going, which is the instinctual chemical, the adrenaline within the body, and you can either fight or you can run. And that's something we're born with. That's inborn in all of us. But these other messages are something that comes from the outside. It comes from the divine. In whichever way your listeners understand the divine. You know, it's funny. One of the things that I learned in the interfaith seminary, in the new seminary, was that there's a version, an iteration of the golden rule in virtually every religion. In virtually every faith, there's something that says, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, love thy neighbor as thyself. If every human being in every faith practiced that basic tenet, that golden rule, what a different world this would be, wouldn't it?
Oh, 100%. And it even seems like it shines through even the political sphere, right? Because it just seems like we're not doing unto others as we've done to us, even in politics. So there's that as well. Now, Dad, I have to ask you this. Is the experience as a 9/11 chaplain with my mom, Lori Sue Brockway, in the book, or can you weigh in on that as we just commemorate? I can't believe 23 years later. That's hard to believe how time's flying.
I wrote a poem about 9/11, which is in the book, but it doesn't really, it speaks to the fact that your mother and I, not the poem, but just the introduction says that your mother and I were chaplains for the Red Cross after 9/11. Another synchronistic story. So 9/11, I was out in Billings, Montana, attending a business conference, and your mother was here back in New York. This is before we were living together in her apartment on 44th Street, up the block from the United Nations. And I had the television on watching the news, and she had it on simultaneously. And they broke into a bulletin that said that a small plane had crashed into one of the towers at the World Trade Center. And I said, look what's happening on television. They said a small plane. While we were watching, the second plane hit, and we knew that this was not a small plane. We knew that this was a terror attack. So I suggested to her, you were in school out in Long Island, and I suggested to her that she find a way of getting out to you as soon as possible safely. The both of you lived in an apartment up the block from the United Nations, and I said, that United Nations area, I hope nothing happens there. But in any event, she was able to arrange that you got picked up and taken to a safe place. And I took the first plane out of Montana, was that Friday. It came into Newark Airport. And as I was flying into Newark Airport, we could still see the smoke rising from the wreckage of the World Trade Center. It was pretty horrible to see. And I took a cab back from Newark back into Manhattan. It was reunited with your mother. And she had mentioned that she had gone down to the Red Cross and volunteered to be a chaplain, that there was chaplaincy training that Saturday. And so I joined her in that chaplaincy training. For the next several weeks, we spent our days doing our day jobs. And every evening went to the Family Assistance Center that the city had established on the west side of Manhattan in a pier, and listened to people who were waiting for word of their loved ones. Some of the stories were amazing, and helping them through their grief process. And also some of the first responders were there. Just there were so many synchronicities and so many beautiful stories at a time of such horror, that so much love and empathy emerged, and we became unified as a people, as a city, as a people, and as Americans. And I wish we had that same unity today.
I do feel like we've lost empathy along the way, and feel like you are very empathetic. And does the book help people find their empathy side of the brain, if you will? Like, does this book teach empathy, Circles and Rings?
Empathy is something that is within each of us. It has to be engendered and has to be brought out. And there are a few of the poems touch on the concept of listening and empathy and compassion. But empathy is something I believe that each and every sentient human being is born with. And sometimes it's shut off and sometimes it's turned on. It's a question of just opening your heart and opening your soul, and extending and reaching out to others and sharing, again, that golden rule. You see someone who's sad, listen to them, give them compassion, give them that empathy. You see someone who is in need of something. A quick example, you go into a grocery store and you see someone, an elderly person, trying to reach to the very top shelf to get something. They can't do it. And you always offer first. You don't do it. You say, may I help you get that? And you'll always see a smile and say, yes, thank you so much. Even a surprise smile, because unfortunately a lot of people don't do this today. When you go out of a door, hold the door open for someone coming out behind you. This is something my mother taught me as a child. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of that today. Little acts of kindness, and that's where the empathy is engendered, uh, where this concept of the golden rule really resides. Just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do unto you.
My grandma Mal is definitely an impetus for this writing. The passing is an impetus for this poem. And
Hmm.
I've often wondered how you've been able to grieve, because when we're around each other, I don't see, I don't know how you are grieving, and if you are still grieving the loss of your mom. We never get over the loss of our parents.
Well, let me tell you something about that. I know that your dad passed last year. My mom passed in 2020. One of the things that you come to recognize is that grieving doesn't have to last forever. Memories will last forever. And so anytime I have a situation that brings me a thought of sadness about my mother, I start remembering all of the wonderful times that we had together, the holidays, the gifts that we shared, the lessons that she taught me when I was growing up, which are so fundamental to my life. Just things of that nature, and it'll bring a smile to my face. And rather than sadness, it'll bring back the memories and the joy and the blessings that my mother gave to me.
Well, and I know she's going to be with you in the coming weeks as you have another big part of this journey, which I will be supporting you through. And I feel like this book will help you read as you go through this next part. What is next for you, Dad?
Well, you're referring to the fact that I'm having knee replacement surgery coming up next week, and it's something that I've been looking forward to. I'm a very, very mobile person, as you know, and having had this knee go bad has sort of impeded my mobility a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. And I'm looking toward a quick recovery and getting out and running again.
Can you weigh in publicly about Solary? I know there's been a lot of talk of that. Is that next as well once all of the recovery time is complete?
15 or 16 years ago, a business associate of mine who knew about the spiritual work, who knew about my ordination in interfaith ministry and all of the other stuff that I did, the healing work that I did, the Reiki, came to me one day and said, how do you balance the fact that you have this day job in industrial technology, the welding industry, and so on, and this other stuff that you do? And without even thinking about it, I said, the day job pays my salary. I said, the other work pays my solary. This word solary came out of me. Your mother insisted that I trademark it, and I did, for what it's worth. But the next book that I'm working on will be a story about this. It's called Solary, The Compensation of Spirit.
That is pretty deep, and I'm looking forward to that. But I just want to say thank you, Dad, for now 25 plus years of this family. Really, not just a related. It's a family that we've created, that you've created. And I want to thank you for that, for bringing Mom and I into your world 25 years ago plus.
Alex, I've always referred to you as my son. I never said you were my stepson. And what I've come to recognize is you are the son of my spirit. So thank you.
That's very touching to leave on that note. But we will have you back once the recovery time, and we're praying for your surgery to be, smooth, and the recovery time, and then back on the writing trail, right?
Absolutely.
Dad, Victor Fuhrman, Dr. Victor Fuhrman as well. Love you so much, and thanks for joining the One Leg Up Network. And one other thing is, thank you for inspiring me to create the ability portion of this, because you and I sat down during the pandemic and said, how can we make this something more than just a podcast? I think you've really instilled that in me the last 4 years.
And I think I came up with the slogan "One Leg Up" with Alex Garrett. Is right?
That's right. Yep. Yes, that was all you as well. So
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a marketing guy, so I can figure these things out.
it is marketable. Well, I love you so much, Dad, and thanks for all your guidance, love, and care the last 25 plus years. And we keep going.
Alex, I love and adore you, my son. I love and adore you.